We are following breaking news within the past hour. President Trump tweeted his response to today's Iranian missile attack on two military bases in Iraq.
Those bases house U.S. troops. The president said in his tweet that assessments of casualties are taking place, and so far, all is well. Kent Erdahl is monitoring this breaking story for us tonight. Kent?
Julia, Iranian State TV also released this video a few hours ago, which appears to show the moment the missiles hit one of those Iraqi bases that houses U.S. troops. U.S. officials say they aren't aware of any casualties from strikes, but the situation is still being assessed. Iran is claiming responsibility for firing more than a dozen missiles at both the Al-Assad air base west of Baghdad and another base in Erbil. Iran State TV adding that the operation's name was Martyr Soleimani, a direct response to the U.S. killing Iran's top general, whose funeral was held just hours before the attack. Tonight, one of Iran's leaders said the attack was an act of self-defense and that they do not seek an escalation of war, promising no further attacks if there is no retaliation from the U.S. President Trump says he plans to respond with a public statement tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, Minnesota Senators Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith reacted on Twitter tonight, saying they are monitoring what is happening and thinking about the service members and their families. Smith adding, "Let us assert what we do not want, that we do not want war." Some of Minnesota's representatives also weighing in. Republican Pete Stauber tweeted, "As a husband whose wife served overseas, my prayers tonight are with our men and women stationed across the globe and their families." Democrat Ilhan Omar adding, "Let's keep U.S. personnel in our prayers who are in harm's way in Iraq." Back to you.
These two air bases are about 250 miles apart from each other. Erbil is in northern Iraq, close to the border of Iran. Al-Assad Air Base is just west of Baghdad. Al-Assad can house up to 5,000 military personnel. It's a shared base between the Iraqi, UK, and U.S. armed forces. President Trump visited that base once, a surprise visit back in 2018. Vice President Pence was just at Erbil Air Base to visit troops just ahead of Thanksgiving. We will, of course, continue to monitor this rapidly changing story. Download the KARE 11 app for the latest and more on air starting at 4:30 on Sunrise.